Hello everyone and welcome to the Value Notes webinar. Our topic today is navigating India's complex markets using actionable intelligence. Today's presenters are Arun Jethmalani, he is Managing Director at Value Notes, and me, Varsha Chitale. I'm a director and I look after the CI practice. So this is how we will proceed today. First, Arun will give you a short introduction to Value Notes, and then I'll take you through the complexities and the characteristics of Indian markets and also various effective ways of gathering competitive intelligence. Finally, Arun will come back and walk you through a couple of case studies that are based on our own research that we've done in the past. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat window, and we'll address them all together at the end of the main presentation. So now it's over to Arun.
Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning as the case may be. I think we're still waiting for a few people to join in. So I'll run through a quick introduction of Value Notes before Varsha gets into the main subject of today's webinar. So Value Notes is a business research and competitive and market intelligence firm. We're located in India in a city called Pune and have been in business for about 13 years. Right? We have around 70 employees, most of whom have postgraduate or professional qualifications. Our analysts come from diverse backgrounds, commerce, engineering, economics, statistics, life sciences, and that allows us to have multifunctional teams depending on the nature of the project. A lot of our analysts have worked in industry. In terms of customers, we serve customers from all over the world, US, Europe, Middle East, China, Asia Pacific, Australia, and of course in India. We take pride in our values, in the independence of our research, the fact that it's unbiased, and that we follow high ethical standards in the collection of information and the presentation of information. And ultimately, the objective is to provide value to our customers by meeting very specific research needs. And in the last 5 years, we've completed more than 100 competitive intelligence or market intelligence projects just in the India geography. We've done work in other geographies as well, but in India, there's been more than 100 projects. These have typically been for companies, large companies, multinationals, and consultants who are advising similar companies on their India strategy or growth, diversification, etc. As I mentioned, these are highly customized to suit specific customer needs. They could be around market sizing and segmentation, opportunity assessment, product launch intelligence, competitor benchmarking, news monitoring, etc. And this has been across several sectors, including IT, BPO, financial services, engineering, healthcare, etc. Our research has been quoted in the international media and publications like The Economist, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, etc. We've also been recognized by a number of organizations, have presented at number of conferences, including SKIP conferences in the US, Brazil, Rome, etc. And amongst Indian competitive intelligence companies, we regard ourselves as one of the pioneers. We're not really aware of many companies that have this length and breadth of experience, right? We've also been very active in trying to build a CI community in India. We have a LinkedIn group called Competitive Intelligence Network India. We're also working with SKIP to start an India chapter. So that's really all about value notes, and I think all of you are waiting to get into the meat of today's presentation. So I'll hand over now to Varsha, who will take you through the rest. If any of you have any questions about value notes, please send a mail or write a question on the webinar screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun. So we'll tackle today's theme in 3 parts. First, we'll look at the characteristics of Indian markets and what they mean for competitive intelligence. We'll then look at ways to overcome the challenges and go into what it takes to get actionable intelligence in India. And finally, as I mentioned, we'll go to the case studies. So here are some key characteristics of Indian markets that impact competitive intelligence. One is that the markets are largely unorganized. They are highly fragmented. A large grey market exists in many sectors. And finally, the level of documentation is very low. So let's look at what each of these mean. So what do we mean by unorganized? It means that enterprises are not registered with any authority, or they are not regulated, or they don't maintain books of accounts. These are typically small private enterprises owned by individuals or households, and they are operated as proprietary firms or on a partnership basis. In India, as many as 80% of the enterprises are unregistered. The unorganized sector employs more than 90% of the workforce and contributes close to 60% of GDP. A big chunk of the unorganized activity is related to agriculture. But even in the non-agricultural sectors, it's quite significant. It comprises about 40% in mining, manufacturing and infrastructure and about 47% in services. Secondly, as I mentioned, most industry sectors are fragmented. What that means is they comprise of a very large number of small enterprises. And this is true actually even in the organized sector. Historically, certain sectors were reserved as what were called the small-scale industries. So in these reserved industries, enterprises couldn't grow beyond a certain size, and this led to fragmentation. Now, over the years, the number of industries that were reserved as small scale have reduced considerably, but the high level of fragmentation still persists. The small scale sector, which is now called micro, small and medium enterprise sector, which is MSME, it contributes about 8% of GDP, 50% of manufactured exports, 45% of industrial employment. And as many as 95% of all industrial units are in the MSME sector. 90% of these are proprietary firms. There are only a few industries like banking, telecom, insurance, for instance, which have a finite and known number of players, limited number of players. In other sectors, there could be a few, 3, 4 relatively large, well-known players, and then a very large number of small, possibly regional companies. The hospital industry, for example, fits into this category, or real estate is another example. So a very large number of hospitals have less than 5 beds. And similarly, among builders, there are hundreds of small builders with just 1 or 2 projects in their portfolio. The grey market in India is also quite large. Now, this is defined as a market where the goods and services are bought and sold without paying taxes. So sales tax, import duties, and so on. Domestically, grey markets exist for a large number of products such as auto components, alcohol, computer hardware, personal goods, packaged goods, mobile phones, tobacco, and so on. Imported goods such as electronics, pharmaceuticals, computer peripherals, spares, all these also fall in the grey market. Now, estimating the size of grey markets is challenging because obviously there are no records here. For instance, I came across an article which estimated that 60 to 90% of iPods in India are sold through the grey market. Now you'll notice that the estimate is actually very wide, 60 to 90%. And this is because there's no real hard data here. Such broad estimates are not really usable for any practical purposes. Now it's impossible to get accuracy here, but with appropriate methodologies, it's possible to narrow down these estimated ranges so that they can actually be used for planning and strategizing. Another key feature in India which complicates the research and CI activity is the sheer diversity in the country. So there are 30 states with wide differences in terms of income levels, economic development, education, literacy, culture, languages, even government regulations. So for example, literacy rates are over 90% in a state like Kerala. As against say only about 50% in Bihar. Per capita incomes vary. In Haryana, they could be as high as 70,000 rupees, and in Manipur, they could be as low as 21,000 rupees. Culture, food habits, preferences again are not uniform at all. For example, we were advising a client on the almond market in India. So in the northern states, almond are used in food preparation, and so the consumption is very high, quite high. On the other hand, in the south, consumption is almost negligible, and this is because they use cashew in their food instead of almonds. In terms of regulation as well, under the country's federal structure, the administration is decentralized. So some areas such as defense, railway, atomic energy, banking, shipping, and others come under the central government jurisdiction, but there are many others like water, power, education, liquor, police, and so on, which are decided at the state level. So every state now has its own policies and regulations. Finally, even the amount of documentation that's available varies across states. So some states have very good data and statistics, whereas in others, it's very hard to get anything at all. So to conclude, for all practical purposes, when you're doing CI in India, you're actually doing it in multiple markets, multiple diverse markets. Bringing all these characteristics and factors together, one can see that the statistical machinery in the country is really burdened. What with a large number of enterprises, diverse states, regulations, statistics, data, and so on. Additionally, the private sector statistical machinery is quite weak, unlike in other developed countries. There are about 150 industry associations in India, but only a very few of them are strong and have their own databases. Most others are weak, both in terms of membership as well as their scope of activities. There are some organizations like the CMI, the Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy, which is in the private sector, and research institutes like, say, the NCAER, the National Council for Applied Economic Research. Now, these do collect their own data and statistics, but they are nowhere close to being comprehensive. There are very few private sector databases because mainly this market, the market for information in India, is immature. There are simply not enough people wanting to pay for the data. But this is changing rapidly, and we expect that as the demand for data increases, the number of data providers will also grow. The government is currently the key agency that collects data. Now, the nodal agency is the National Statistical Office with its two wings, the NSSO, the National Sample Survey Organization, and the CSO, the Central Statistical Organization. The NSO undertakes some large surveys on its own as well, including the national census. Then there are various ministries and departments of the government